Good evening and welcome to the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council program featuring our panel speaking on the topic of obstacles to peace, stories about Palestine. Few topics could be timelier and more urgent, and so we thank you for holding space with us here today. My name is Peter Gerlach. I am ICFRC's Executive Director and your host for today's program. This year marks ICFRC's 40th anniversary. We are celebrating our supporters, our legacy in the community, and the bright future ahead for internationally focused programming in Iowa City. We are deeply grateful for the long-standing support from our community. Many of you are here today. Your help has allowed our organization to grow for 40 years, hosting speaker programs with experts, joining us in person and online from across the world. As a small nonprofit, we exist because of the generosity of individuals like all of you. We also extend our heartfelt thanks to those joining us virtually today or watching this program broadcast online via City Channel 4. You are an integral part of our broad, interconnected community. I hope all of you will consider making a financial contribution today by scanning one of the QR codes in the room or visiting our website. These free programs are only possible because of your support. And finally, thank you to our sponsors and community partners for their support. In particular, today we recognize the Iowa City Public Library for their partnership and for the refreshments served today. And most certainly, thank you to our co-organizers, Iowans for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and the Middle Eastern and North African Student Association for helping us put together this event. You'll find resources from the different organizations at your tables and at the table by the door. ICFRC has adopted the Native American Land Acknowledgement prepared for the City of Iowa City's Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Human Rights Commission. ICFRC recognizes that our home community of Iowa City now occupies the homelands of Native American nations to whom we owe our commitment and our dedication. The full text of ICFRC's acknowledgement is on our website at icfrc.org. For today's program, we would also ask that you consider the space that we are in, and that when we get to the conversation point, the Q&A point, your questions are rooted in empathy and respect for the wide array of views that we know exist on this topic. As you see here, we have some community guidelines that we'd like all to abide by today, and we thank you in advance for that. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Dani Love Misyuk is a Jewish Ukrainian American born in Brooklyn, New York. They are a community organizer who has done work ranging from the New York City Mayor's Office program to end gender and domestic-based violence, LGBTQ+ rights, Jewish Voice for Peace, and facilitating youth action healthy relationship workshops. They study anthropology with specific interest in social justice movements throughout different cultures and time periods. Deema Tota is a Palestinian American assistant professor of engineering. She was born and raised in Ramallah, Palestine. She received a BS from MIT and a PhD from the University of Michigan in mechanical engineering before moving to Iowa City in 2021. She does research with assistive devices for mobility and is a member of the international organization Scientists for Palestine. Deema's father wrote journal entries in English during the time of the story she told, that she will tell. These entries are included in a printed booklet that you'll find at your tables. Samanth Brotman is a Jewish American from the Pacific Northwest, raised by and in Jewish institutions like the Jewish Community Center, Jewish summer camps, B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, her synagogue, and Hillel. Sam grew up learning that Zionism was synonymous with her Jewish identity. She began unlearning Zionism as a young adult, spurred in part by visiting Israel and Palestine on a birthright trip, and eventually became an anti-Zionist activist As an adult, she earned an MA in Middle East Studies and Arabic, became a staff member at Jewish Voice for Peace, where she worked for 8 years, and recently became a founding member of JVP Eastern Iowa. She has lived in Iowa City for 1.5 years. Mona Odeh is a Palestinian German American. She was born and raised in Mainz, Germany, and her parents came from Hawara, Palestine, a small town near the city of Nablus. While living in Germany, her family took summer trips to visit the family in Hawara every 2 years. She moved to Ohio when she was a teenager in 1997. She went to the University of Cincinnati and received her BS in biological science. After that, she went to OSU for the MCDB, or Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology PhD program, and received her master's. She moved to Iowa City over a 1.5 years ago with her little family from Columbus, Ohio. Yaser Abadagga is a Palestinian American, originally from Gaza. Yaser moved to the US in 1991. He received a BS and MS in mechanical engineering from Oregon State University and an MBA from the University of Iowa. Yaser moved to Iowa in 1997 and has been living in Coralville since. Yaser is a co-founder of Iowans for Palestine and Hope Relief Foundation. Please join me in welcoming this amazing panel.
All right, can y'all hear me okay? First, I want to say thank you so much to Peter for facilitating and organizing this event. So I'm Dani. I am a first-generation Ukrainian Jewish American. When the Berlin Wall fell, my family came to the United States as refugees. They found themselves in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, a multi-ethnic neighborhood of mainly ex-Soviet immigrants. Growing up there was like growing up in a different place altogether. We called ourselves Little Odessa, the gem of the sea. My family wasn't very religious due to the sanctions on religion in the USSR. I was the first person in a few generations to be bat mitzvahed. While religion was not a main part of my childhood, cultural Eastern European Judaism was. We celebrated Hanukkah with a menorah and New Year's with a tree. We watched Russian cartoons, ate matzo ball soup, and went to temple once a year. Rosh Hashanah was filled with the sweetest honey and the brightest candles. And I grew up holding the Star of David close to my heart in the form of my great-grandmother's necklace. My great-grandparents were Holocaust survivors. I knew my great-grandfather Akim well until he passed away when I was 10. I asked him one day to tell me about how he survived the Nazi invasion of Odessa. He agreed, and even though I was so young, I remember feeling a surge of pride. We decided to meet at the boardwalk next to my apartment building. My grandfather and I got there, but Akim was nowhere to be found. I knew he was gone. He passed from a heart attack that morning, but he left a letter for me on his desk. It was the one that he had submitted to the Steven Spielberg documentary on survivors of the Shoah. It wasn't until recently that I found the documentary video itself that he was in. Watching it and seeing the words come directly from his mouth was endlessly heartbreaking. He spoke of losing his mother and sister brutally in front of him, about his father being ripped away from him shortly after, of how he ran away back to Odessa only to find himself completely alone in an empty apartment for months. Akim survived on his own as an orphan teenager, the trauma of which I'll never be able to fully comprehend. The line that completely broke me was when he said, "God was there with us, and God was weeping." How heartbreaking that he found God in the face of death. Growing up, Israel was not the center of my Judaism. We were a proud Ukrainian Jewish family, survivors, fighters, resilient in the face of extermination. Israel was discussed as a given, a place where Jewish people live. It wasn't special, but it was eternal. I knew I had extended family in Israel that my mom constantly told me she wanted to move to Brooklyn with us. Palestine and Palestinian people were never mentioned except for ancient terminology. I had Jewish friends in high school who went to Hebrew school and summer camp. One of them would talk to me about how excited she was for her graduation birthright trip to Israel. I always felt uncomfortable by this. At the time, I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was ashamed of my Jewishness, that I was not as Jewish as my peers, that I felt more connected to Ukrainian Jewish culture than the standard Israeli Jewish culture. I thought that I was struggling through internalized anti-Semitism and that the lack of love I felt for Israel was because I wanted to be seen as an American goy. I struggled with my ethnic Jewishness for many years. I was ashamed of my nose because of its hook. I was ashamed of my hair because of its dark curl. I bought into anti-Semitic and Eurocentric beauty standards that made me feel ashamed of myself. I have watched in horror as synagogues across the United States were targets of shootings and had classmates make Holocaust jokes at me. These were real struggles that I have experienced as a Jewish person. However, this is not why I was uncomfortable with Israel. In 2021, I was 18 and had just started becoming connected to the world in a way that wasn't warped by my parents. On May 12th, Israel bombed the Gaza Strip. Over 200 Palestinians were killed. I was horrified, and I began my research into what Israel really was. I started speaking out against this online. I was not yet aware of the extent of the horror Palestinians had faced in the many decades leading up to then. At that point, I was only calling for an end to Israeli bombardment of Palestine. What I forgot was that my friends and cousins who were raised more Zionist still followed me. I was harassed in my messages for days, called an anti-Semite and a capo. I lost people I considered close friends. One of my cousins showed what I had written to my mother. After school, she called me into her bedroom. She told me she was ashamed of me and that I was a traitor. She yelled at me for a long time, making me out to be a vile person. She kicked me out of our apartment that night. I packed my things and left, not knowing where to go. Luckily, my friend took me in for a while. My mother did ask me to come back eventually, but she never apologized, held financial support over my head, and threatened to tell the rest of my family how awful I had been. This was all traumatic, and I buried it for years. I tried not to think about my own mother kicking me out of my home because I called for an end to brutality. Now that I'm an adult, I have limited communication with my family. They have buckled down on their seemingly newfound devotion of Israel, and I have never felt more ashamed or alone. The centering of Israel and Jewish communities has led to my ostracization and demonization. That is the price that Israeli policies and actions have: brutal occupation and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people and the rejection of any Jew who stands against it. I stand proudly with my anti-Zionist ancestors like the Jewish Labor Bund Party, and today with Jewish Voice for Peace, in steadfast solidarity with Palestinians. Being Jewish is a great joy in my life. I love my culture, my heritage, my songs. I love my people. That does not mean I will sit idly by as Israel uses my symbols, my intergenerational trauma, and my religion to commit genocide, steal land, and maintain an ethno-state. As a Jewish person who has heard accounts of the Shoah firsthand, they were brutal, vile, and unbearable. I see the footage coming out of Gaza, and I see Akeem and his family. I see children orphaned like he was. I see the destruction of Palestinian history, land, and people. It will never be justified. Biden has said in multiple speeches that the protection of Israel is necessary for the protection of the Jewish people, making it clear that this government does not care about our safety in the United States. Just a few weeks ago, neo-Nazis marched freely in the streets of Nashville, while Free Palestine protesters faced violent arrests and suppression. Yet our protection supposedly has to come at the cost of Palestinian people and their allies? To say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is to diminish the real pain Jewish people have experienced and still endure today. How is condemning an occupation equal to the neo-Nazis in our streets chanting, "The Jews will not replace us," with no consequences? The end goal of Zionism is to destroy the Palestinian people and the Jewish diaspora. Anti-Zionists know that liberation is a collective fight. The safety and freedom of Palestinian people and Jewish people around the world go hand in hand. Never again means never again for anyone. Free Palestine.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Should I get closer? You can hear me? Okay. No. Thank you. Get closer, get closer. Is this good? Okay, great. Thank you, Dani. I am Deema Tota, and just before I start, I just wanted to say that any views I express today are my own, and that I am not representing any organization or institution that I am affiliated with. Okay, thank you for being here today. So I grew up in Ramallah, Palestine. Ramallah is in the West Bank. While the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, a recognized entity in the UN, it is still under Israeli military control. The Israeli military controls all the borders and has over 200 military checkpoints within the West Bank, as well as over 150 illegal Israeli settlements where only Jews may own homes. The settlements are surrounded by Israeli Jewish-only roads that slice through Palestinian lands, homes, and towns. Palestinians, including Palestinian American citizens like me, are not allowed to drive on these roads. The Israeli military frequently uses scare tactics in the West Bank. I'm going to tell you a story of one of these scare tactics today. And as you listen, know that I have many, many, many stories, at least one from each year of my life. But for this story, we're going to go back to 2002, when I was 11 and a half years old. The Palestinian Second Intifada was in full swing. Intifada is the Arabic word for uprising. It literally translates to mean a shaking off. It is a grassroots resistance movement to military occupation. At that time, in 2002, my 8-year-old sister and I attended the Ramallah Friends School, a school founded by American Quakers. But we did a lot of homeschooling that year, since we were forced to stay home often that year due to Israeli martial law. Martial law is where Israeli soldiers drive around in their army jeeps or tanks in the town and announce over loudspeakers that everyone is to remain inside their homes until further notice. All businesses close, kids have to be picked up from schools, and grocery stores are flooded with parents stocking up on milk, bread, flour, and canned food. One night in April of 2002, I was watching TV with my family, my mother, my father, and my 8-year-old sister, when suddenly we heard loud bangs on all 3 entrances of our house, the front door, kitchen door, and back door, followed by a loud, forceful voice that said, in broken Arabic with a thick Israeli accent, "Open the door or I'll shoot." My parents gathered my sister and I next to them and ran to the door. They opened it, and several soldiers stormed in with their guns. They ordered us to go down to our basement. My sister and I sat on the couch in the basement while my parents walked upstairs with the soldiers. They separated my parents. A group of soldiers walked with each parent to a different part of the house to search it, they said. Palestinians are not allowed to own any weapons. If weapons are ever found on the premises, individuals are immediately taken to political detention, and often their homes are demolished as a tactic of collective punishment. Over 9,000 Palestinians are currently held in political prisons without due process, including over 200 children. While my parents were upstairs with the soldiers, my sister and I suddenly heard a barrage of gunshots fired from inside our house. We immediately ran to the corner of the room away from any windows. That is what we knew to do when the Israeli army was in town and we heard gunfire. Stay away from the windows. I held my sister tightly, and all I remember was trying to protect her while I wondered if my parents were still alive. I had heard so many stories of Israeli soldiers executing Palestinian civilians on the spot. I wondered if that would be my parents' fate. Luckily, it was not. My tearful eyes spotted my mother running down the basement stairs. She immediately hugged us, and she said she was okay. "They are shooting outside of the house through the windows," she said. They told my father, later I found out that they had told my father that someone was shooting at them from outside the house. We live in a peaceful residential neighborhood. No one was shooting at them. I later learned that this is a common tactic used by the Israeli Occupation Forces, or IOF, to announce their presence in a neighborhood when they decide they are going to use a house as a temporary base for military operations. My father came downstairs later, followed by the soldiers. The entire family sat on the couch, my sister and I still shivering in my mother's arms, while the soldiers told us that they are going to be taking over our house until further notice. They said they needed to search my sister and my room for weapons. I clung to my parents this time. I would not leave their side, while the soldiers moved my toys, opened closets, and ruffled my clothes with the end of a rifle. You should know that my family and I are all American citizens. The American consulate was aware that soldiers had taken over our house. They did not care. We are Palestinian. The soldiers communicated with us in English through a young American soldier. He was maybe 18 or 19. He kept asking if we were okay. My mother said, no, we are not okay. He asked why my sister and I were not in school. He asked who the books in our home library belonged to. He could not fathom that Palestinians read New York Times best-selling authors. I recently learned that many American Jews choose to serve in the Israeli army and have no idea what they are really doing to the Palestinian people. I commend U.S. Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Israeli groups like Breaking the Silence, where soldiers blow the whistle on Israeli military violence, as well as a growing movement of conscientious objectors to military service within Israel. For 3 days, the soldiers kept us in the basement, guarded by one soldier at all times. My mother had to ask permission to get food and water from the kitchen several times a day. They thankfully left our home after the 3rd day. My parents hadn't slept much at all. The soldiers left on a Sunday. It was Easter Sunday, I later recalled. We hadn't celebrated Easter that year. When the soldiers left, one of them turned back and told my mother that we had a nice home and he would love to visit again. They left, and they took with them our camera, my dad's binoculars, and the new laser mouse. They left behind mud from their army boots, chipped tiles from where they emptied their guns on our floors. They left a family and 2 little girls. But little did they know that little girls grow up. They heal, and they tell their story. You'll find at your tables and in the table on the back a booklet containing a collection of journal entries, as Peter mentioned. This is written by my father during this time in English. It is his words. It is during the time of the story that I just shared. Please take 1 or 2 home with you, read it for more context, and give it to a friend. At the tables, there are some large font printouts there, and help tell a Palestinian story. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay. So my name is Sam, or Samantha. Thank you again for organizing this. I was raised deep inside the belly of mainstream Jewish American life. I went to the Jewish Community Center for preschool, before and after school care, Jewish summer camp, Jewish youth group. In college, I was student board president at Hillel. And all this time spent in Jewish institutions meant that I was a Zionist by default. I was made to understand that Israel was not only part and parcel of my Jewish identity, it was central to it. Every day that I walked into that Jewish community center, I walked past an Israeli flag flying outside. At my synagogue, there was an Israeli flag up on the altar next to the Torah. At camp, many of our counselors were Israeli soldiers. In art class, we colored Israeli flags with crayons. We celebrated Israeli Independence Day alongside Jewish holidays like Hanukkah or Purim. In youth group, we sang songs with lyrics like, "From Zion came the white and blue, we hold these colors bold and true." You get the idea. I didn't learn much about Palestine from these Jewish institutions. What I understood was that Israel was this amazing, beautiful place, and it was my home, and that there were some Arabs that lived nearby who wanted to kill Israelis and all Jews just for being Jews. It wasn't until my late teens that I started to question this narrative. I began to at least understand that there was a quote-unquote conflict. So I began to learn more, and I spent years trying desperately to reconcile what I was learning about Israel and Palestine with my progressive values. In an effort to make Zionism make sense, in 2006, as a college sophomore, I decided to go on Birthright, which is a 10-day, all-expenses-paid, so-called heritage trip to Israel, in which any Jewish person around the world can participate. The experience on Birthright was strange from the get-go. I was told from the moment I stepped off the plane in Tel Aviv that this was my home, but it wasn't. I am not from Israel. I don't even have family in Israel. It was a foreign country. My cohort, consisting of young Jewish adults from around the U.S., was accompanied the entire time by a group of young, handsome Israeli soldiers whose job, it seemed, was to carry machine guns and flirt with all the female participants. In my desperation to find some sort of clarity that would help me just relax into a Zionist worldview, I tried to ignore some troubling details. The trip organizers were careful to avoid exposing us to the more disturbing facts of life, like waiting until it was dark out to drive our tour bus along the massive militarized wall separating Israel from the West Bank, or rushing past the racist anti-Arab graffiti on the walls in Jerusalem. I was playfully mocked for asking questions about Palestine or about the war that was unfolding with Lebanon while we were there. I noticed these things, but I so desperately wanted something to make sense. I really wanted to be able to go home and defend Zionism and defend Israel to my friends and peers. Ultimately, I never found that clarity, quite the opposite. One particular experience on Birthright is worth telling in more detail. The trip organizers arranged for our group to meet with representatives from the Jewish National Fund, the JNF. The JNF brands itself as an environmental nonprofit whose main activity is planting and protecting forests in Israel. I grew up putting my spare change in little JNF boxes every weekend at Hebrew school, imagining that I was helping to make the desert bloom in Israel. When I was in Israel, we met some JNF staff in what appeared to be an open field, and we were each given a tree sapling with a tag attached, part of which we could remove and keep with us forever. They told us as we planted our trees that we now had literal and metaphorical roots in Israel, and that we must promise to come back and see our trees grow. It felt a little heavy-handed at the time, but I thought, hey, planting trees can't be bad. It has to be a good thing. What I didn't know then was that starting in the early 20th century, the JNF, even before the founding of the State of Israel, the JNF had begun purchasing large swaths of land from Palestinian landowners. And then over time, it came to control large swaths of land that had belonged to Palestinians who were expelled. And today, the JNF owns nearly all of Israel's public lands, therefore manages land use, approves home demolitions, prevents Palestinians from owning or building, and is responsible for the sale of land to private Israeli citizens both in Israel and in the occupied West Bank. They also have a long-standing practice of planting trees on top of destroyed Palestinian villages, hiding the evidence. When I returned from my trip, I took a human geography course from a Jewish American professor. In his unit about greenwashing, this professor taught me the history of the JNF and showed us pictures of Palestinian villages before they were destroyed, after they were destroyed, and then after the JNF forest had been planted on top of them. He showed us a map of various locations this had taken place across Israel, and I recognized immediately where I had planted my tree. The JNF told me that I had literal and metaphorical roots in Israel, but now I knew that my hands were literally and metaphorically dirty in the violent crime of ethnic cleansing. I was furious, humiliated, and heartbroken. It was that day that I resolved to never let anyone tell me how I should feel or think about Israel, Palestine, Palestinians, or Zionism. I began learning as much as I could. I learned about the Nakba, the catastrophe in which nearly a million Palestinians were expelled from their homes in 1948. I learned about Zionism for what it really is, an inherently flawed project, a blip in the grand scheme of Jewish history. Zionism's logic says that maintaining Jewish supremacy over the land of Israel will always require a denial of Palestinian right to return to their homes, and it will require a level of violent social engineering and inequality for non-Jews who live inside the borders that Israel claims forever. My birthright trip, that trip that is explicitly designed to cement a lifelong connection for American Jews to Israel, failed, in my case. Instead, it sparked a lifelong commitment to activism in the Palestinian movement for justice, to act consistently in solidarity with Palestinians. It led me to Jewish Voice for Peace, a grassroots and very fast-growing anti-Zionist Jewish organization. I worked for JVP as a staff member, I've remained a member, and helped found a chapter here in Iowa City. And my activism has actually landed me on some nefarious blacklists. For example, the infamous Canary Mission, whose stated goal is to ruin career prospects for Palestine activists. And JVP, by the way, and its key leaders, is the only US-based group that Israel has explicitly banned, meaning I, a Jew, am banned from entering Israel. This doesn't come close to the repercussions that Palestinians face for their activism, but I share this just to show that Israel is not, as it claims, a home or a safe haven for all Jewish people. It is only for those who are willing to toe a particular political line, for those who are willing to say that Jewish safety must come at the expense of Palestinian safety, for those who are willing to excuse or turn a blind eye to violent settler colonialism, apartheid, and occupation. That's not me. I am apparently the wrong kind of Jew for Israel. I think about that tree I planted all the time. I assume it's still there. I like to imagine that through my activism, I'm uprooting my tree and replanting it spiritually in a soil of solidarity, action, and learning. I also like to reflect on how the very concept of uprootedness can be both beautiful and horrific. For Jews, uprootedness is something that I've come to understand to be central to Jewish identity. So much of Jewish tradition and thought was forged in the diaspora, in Europe, in the US, elsewhere in the Middle East. And while Jerusalem is central to our faith tradition, physically being there or owning that land is not. In fact, I believe that not being there, not owning that land, is in and of itself a defining feature and a beautiful feature of the Jewish experience. And there are many rabbis and theologians who agree. At the same time, since 1948, uprootedness has come to define so many Palestinians' lives, and that uprootedness is born out of violence and erasure. I think about the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian olive trees that have been uprooted in service of this ethno-nationalist project. And I think about the Palestinians who cannot return to their homes, many of whom who've been holding on to their house keys for generations, holding steadfast in hope of return. I'm deeply ashamed of many of the things I used to believe unquestioningly, and of my complicity in Israel's brutal crimes, because I'm a tax-paying American citizen and because Israel purports to act in my name as a Jew. But I choose to mobilize that shame, and I'm committed to disentangling Zionism from Jewish life, to forcing open more and more space for Palestinian-led organizing to succeed, and to standing in solidarity with Palestinians and anyone else who's working towards justice. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Salam. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, sister.
Salam, peace be upon you all. So when I lived in Germany as a child, we would visit my family every 2 years in Hawara, which is in the West Bank next to Nablus, the city of Nablus. Hawara back then in the 90s was an agricultural village. So my family members had many different farm animals. I helped herd the goats with my uncle, ran and played with my cousins among the many olive groves, climbed fig trees, ate the figs, harvested almonds while still green and ate those too. The most beautiful time of my childhood was being with my wonderful, fun, albeit loud, family in Hawara. 80% of my family still lives there in Hawara today. Aunts, uncles, cousins that span generations back. I myself can count 7 generations back, so that makes easily over 200 years, 150 to 200 years of my family living in Hawara. Since then, Hawara has become more of a bustling little town where many people started taking on other jobs besides just farm work. Though every October, they still harvest the olives, an important source of income for Palestinians, an important symbol for us as well. Though as much as I love being in Palestine with my family, something awful and dangerous always loomed over our heads: the occupation. I've seen Israel's military occupation as a young child, as a teenager, as a woman, and I only got a taste of it compared to my family that lives through it every day. I will mainly speak of what I saw as a child in the 90s. There's, like Deema said, a lot of stories, a lot. There are no airports in Palestine. So to get to Hawara, we would always have to land in Amman, Jordan, and then go through the King Hussein Bridge, El Jisr in Arabic. That is composed of 3 border crossings. The Jordanian one, the Israeli one, which is the worst of the treatment of Palestinians by far, and the Palestinian one, which is basically PLO trying to overcharge you on everything, get your money. I will focus on the experience of the Israeli border crossing, that one, the worst one for us. After finishing up at the Jordanian border, buses must be ridden to the Israeli one. Even as a child, I remember having to wait for hours in those buses before being allowed into the Israeli border crossing facility, the actual facility. They just made us wait for hours on end in these buses. I remember it being so hot in the bus and dripping with sweat. There was no AC in these buses back then. Why did we have to wait? Because the IOF, Israeli Occupational Force, wants it so, arbitrarily at times, just because. Once we were allowed entrance through the gate, I remember seeing a pile of luggage belonging to the Palestinians on the floor. Bags and luggage were thrown off the buses, and Palestinians had to sift through the pile to find their luggage. There were times where we had to exit the bus completely, as we sat waiting before being allowed entrance through the gate, the border crossing, Israeli border crossing gate. We would stay in this enclosed area with metal bars, fences, barbed wire, and unimaginable, unsanitary restrooms. Happy to expand later, ask me at your own risk. I'm not going to get into it here. Once we were finally allowed in the border facility, it looked like utter chaos. Utter chaos, people everywhere, and IOF soldiers with their big guns roaming around. We were going from one booth to the next, waiting, sitting, booth to booth. It was different papers you had to show. It was steroids. It was red tape on steroids is what it was. Later, I found out that this chaos was an intentional oppression tactic to deter Palestinians wanting to go home, see your family. As a child, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't angry or annoyed. I just went through the motions, like all the other Palestinian families. Just get through it. This is what we get to do. This is what we have to do. One thing I did know instinctively, though, was to not leave my parents aside, who, by the way, maintained an excellent composure despite the entire stress. They were somehow calm. So what I knew instinctively is to stay away as far as possible from these soldiers, from these Israeli occupational forces, those soldiers. Unfortunately, the insanity doesn't stop at the border crossing either. Once you arrive into Jericho and find your ride to bring you to Hawara, there are more checkpoints along the way, checkpoints of humiliation and different means of violence towards us Palestinians. So all in all, a 40-mile drive from the Jordanian border to Hawara, 40 miles, can take all day for a Palestinian, and if we're lucky, maybe half a day. One of my worst memories in Hawara was witnessing an IOF soldier slapping my beautiful, kind grandmother to the ground among her olive groves. My grandmother loved her olive trees, the trees she was a custodian of from generations past, 200 years and more. The trees planted by her father, her grandfather, and his father before him, and on, grandfather and grandmother, grandparents, I should say, and great-grandparents, and great-great-great-grandparents, and back you go. She loved these olive trees like her own children, like her own grandchildren. 2 IOF soldiers came to my grandmother's house, and they started breaking off the branches of one of the olive trees on my grandmother's farm. They just wanted to mess with her, that's all. My grandmother pushed the soldiers off of the olive tree as best she could. My aunt and a couple of cousins were there too, trying to intervene in the act of violence of the day. You know how you have your soup of the day? Palestinians have the act of violence of the day, every day. I stood at a distance with my aunt and screamed when my grandmother hit the ground. My aunt immediately grabbed me and carried me running up to the house. I was young, a child, around 6 or so. And yes, I was terrified and angry. It was awful. It is awful to live in your homeland with non-indigenous, heavily armed adult bullies by your side, over your head, right here. Seeing you as less than human than them, and given carte blanche to do with you whatever they want, whatever they like, even taking your life without much of a consequence. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yaser Abadagga. Can you hear me okay in the back? All right. I'm Palestinian American. I'm from Gaza. My parents are from Gaza. My grandparents are from Gaza. I can narrate 7 names of my great-grandparents that they were born and lived in our village in Gaza that Israel is trying to erase the Palestinian people from now. I'm going to take you back to our village, specifically in the 1980s to a specific event. This is the first time I have experienced the brutality of occupation, apartheid, and collective punishment. I woke up to the sound of Israeli occupation forces bulldozers coming to our neighbor's home. A 2-story building, one of a kind in the whole village. They destroyed the whole thing, left it in pile of, thank you. All right, left it in a pile of twisted metal and broken bricks. No one knew exactly what's going on. Gaza was under military occupation at that time. The military orders are not clear or transparent. More than 10 people lived in that house, and they're all now made homeless. So I asked, what's going on? People were talking about the stolen bike from an Israeli settler, and one of the kids in our neighbor's house were accused of stealing it. My little brain could not comprehend this. A whole family is brutally punished for an alleged petty theft. That's when I fully understood how occupation worked and how the Palestinians are treated inhuman. Before then, I only heard stories about Israeli atrocities committed against the Palestinians, including the 1956 Khan Yunis massacre that my dad miraculously survived. I'm going to fast forward to 2013. I was in a visit to my family back from the United States to Gaza, and I was sitting in the front yard of our house, our family house, and heard a loud explosion very close to the house where we were sitting. People went out to see what's going on. Five houses down the street, an Israeli drone targeted a lady and her daughter that they were in their backyard baking bread on wood stove. At this time, Gaza was under cruel and illegal siege for 6 years on top of the occupation that's more than 50 years now. No cooking gas is allowed, and people went back to using wood stoves and wood ovens. My interpretation for their killings is they are being punished for trying to survive the blockade. There was no reasoning given why the lady and her daughter were killed. Back in Coralville in 2014, I woke up to news of Israeli bombing to a building in our neighborhood in Gaza, with many fatalities, scrambling to try to find out who was affecting, calling frantically everyone I can get hold of. After 4 hours of waiting and agony, the news came in. 6 of my relatives were taken shelter in a house away from a border during the one of Israeli bombardment of Gaza. 2 of them were my cousins. I grew up with them. I'm in shock. Those are the most gentle people anyone could know. Why? What's their crime? And will anyone will be punished for this crime? During that bombing campaign, at least 25,000 Palestinians were killed. 2,500 Palestinians were killed, all civilians, and many houses were destroyed in our village. Coming back to the days that we are living in now and what's going on, the IOF started the rampage through Gaza since October 7. More than 60 people of my relatives have been killed, 12 elderly and sick of my relatives died because of the complete siege and destruction of the healthcare facilities in Gaza. Most of our village is destroyed. Our family house is severely damaged. All the olive trees around it, 67 of them, are completely gone. Some of them are older than the state of Israel itself. For the last 6 months, my siblings and young nieces and nephews lived through hell. They were displaced from their homes, looking for a safe place, but there is no safe place in Gaza. They slept in makeshift tents on the ground, no running water, no electricity, and barely enough food to keep them alive, with bombs continuously falling on them from the sky. I'm not sure how long they will stay alive, so far, more than 35,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli occupation forces, including 14,000 kids. A couple of weeks ago, my brother's kids and sister-in-law were able to leave to Egypt. Once in a hotel, my 10-year-old niece was laying on bed, told her mom, "Mom, I just took a shower and I am sleeping on a bed. I must be in heaven." Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian kids, like my nieces, have been living in harsh conditions with no food, no electricity, no running water, and living in makeshift tents with the horror of the IOF bombing around them. But they are not as lucky as my niece to leave Israel, to leave the Israeli bombardment, and they are still in those conditions. I'm gonna I'm just gonna read a little bit of the statistics so far on what happened since October 7th. At least 33,700 people have been killed in Gaza, including 13,800 children. More than 76,371 people have been injured. And if you do the calculation and scale it up to the population of the United States, that's mean more than 15 million people have been affected by this, either killed or injured. More than 8,000 are missing under the rubble. 1.7 million people are displaced. A new term have been coined by the medical in Gaza, wounded child with no surviving family. 64% of residential buildings destroyed or damaged. 84% of health facilities destroyed or damaged. 869 healthcare workers have been attacked, 350 of them killed, 224 aid worker killed, more than all aid worker deaths worldwide in every war since 1997. 92% of the primary roads destroyed or damaged, 100% of the colleges and universities destroyed. Scholasticide. 100 professors and deans were, and 2 university presidents were killed. 80% of school building damaged, 230 school teachers killed. And the the United Nations had to resurrect a term called democide, which is demolishing homes with no military reason or no military benefits, just for the sake of destroying homes. 140 journalists have been killed since the beginning of this war. So since then, the people here in Iowa, and they're the concerned citizens, I've been working with them to educate the people, so people in Iowa City and in the U.S. in general, because U.S. is the biggest supporter of Israel and continuing unconditional support for Israel. And just to offset this, we have created the Hope Foundation, Relief Foundation, to help the people in Gaza to alleviate some of the suffering. And the Hope Foundation has been providing food, shelter, and water to the Palestinians in Gaza, the needy in Gaza. And also, we are in the process of building a medical point in Gaza to help with taking care of the primary care, if you will, that the only remaining functioning hospital in Gaza is not able to serve those cases because of the overwhelming casualties that they come into them. Thank you all for listening.
Okay, that takes us to the question and answer portion of our program this evening. If you do have a question, we'd ask that you raise your hand, and my colleague from the library, Jason, will bring the microphone to you.
Someone in the back.
A lot of these actions have been occurring because of the U.S. involvement. The U.S. State Department completely is behind this, though Joe Biden and others say kind words. They are not backed up with actions, it seems. Can you tell me, any of you, what it is we can do regarding our government and how we can change their ways, not only the State Department, not just one party. I said Joe Biden, but the Republicans are also there too. Are there things you can tell us that we can do in that area? Do you think that we can do things in that area?
So one of the first things that you can definitely do is to continue to call your senators and Congress and your elected officials. There have been an amazing crowd actually right here in Iowa who have been calling for months every day. And the more the people call, hopefully it'll put more pressure on these elected officials. It is very, very unfortunate that you mainly see us Americans not coming first, that our democracy indeed does not listen to the American people as portrayed. Otherwise, this genocide, I think, wouldn't continue the way that it does, because a majority of Americans do not consent to this form of violence against a group of people. One of the other things that you can do is continue to educate yourself. Seek out not the mainstream media, sorry, not them, not corporate media. Seek out those independent journalists, and we have a few right here in the US too. That is absolutely essential. And honestly, I go to many different news sources around the world, around the globe, not just here in the US, to really get a better overview of what is happening in Palestine. And of course, I have my family that I am in touch with. The other thing is your activism. Support our students who are sacrificing their bodies, sacrificing their careers, sacrificing their education to stand up for what is right, and they're being smeared by our mainstream media in the most disgusting way that I, as a Palestinian, know firsthand, because we've always been smeared for decades on. So it's insane to see the same type of violence that we know all too well as Palestinians being done right here to our American students. It's insane. I look at UCLA, I'm like, Palestine? What? Wait a minute, so the cops are standing here while pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli protesters just brutalize them? Where have I seen this before? Oh, I know, every day as a Palestinian. So also, we have supplied with you some information about activism right here, right now, here in Iowa City. Please join us. We would love to have you. And I am sure someone else.
Yeah, about the documents too, there is a sheet at the table near the entrance of resources that includes a list of senators and representatives to support. One of the biggest lobbies in the U.S. is AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, that funds pro-Israel politicians and funds politicians that are opposing any politician that is speaking up for Palestine. And so supporting the individuals who do speak up, like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. There's a list in the resource sheet that we have for you with links to their campaign websites. We also have lists of organizations, lists of news sources, like Democracy Now! Is one of them that I can think of. And so there is a 2-page sheet in the back with those lists of books and documentaries to learn more as well. So please grab a sheet.
And I would just add to that, too, as far as calling your representatives goes, there are a few organizations that have tools that allow you to do this really easily and with very little prep on your own part. The one I know I'm most familiar with is JVP's. You can call or go to their website, jvp.org, and I think just jvp.org/ceasefire, and it'll bring you to a call tool where you enter your name, your address, or your zip code. It'll call you, and then it'll provide you with a script, and it'll connect you automatically to your representative, and you just read the script, usually to a staffer. Sometimes it's a voicemail. It sounds really scary to do if you've never done it, but then once you've done it a couple times, it becomes super easy, and I just can't encourage you enough to use those tools. I think Empower Change has a tool, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights has a call tool, but JVP has one that I think is really good. So, and then the other thing I would add is that I think politicians, even all the way up to Joe Biden, react to what they see going on in the mainstream discourse, right? And so the more that we do all the things that have just been mentioned, and the more that we're doing events like this and sharing news and making our opinion heard, it adds up, and eventually the tides will turn. I have to believe that the tides will turn.
If I could just mention, just right here in Iowa, we have an Arab American who's running for state Congress from Muscatine County. His name is John DeBeat. And the other thing is Sarah Corkery, who is running against Hinsman in the 2nd District. She went to a pro-Palestinian rally which was in front of Hinsman's office when she was having a fundraiser, and spoke for a ceasefire. So, there are people right here in Iowa that we can support with our presence and our funds.
I've read about campus encampments and demonstrations and the brutal police response around the country, but I really don't know what's happening at the University of Iowa. Could you fill us in what's going on our campus?
Yeah, there's actually, we have a flyer up there of what's going on this weekend. So the students at the university, it's not a university-affiliated group that set this up, but there are many students in this group. Students for Justice in Palestine is a new group in Iowa City, and it's part of a national organization of Students for Justice in Palestine. And they have this weekend from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Pentacrest. Pentacrest, is that how you say it? Pentacrest? Yeah. They have teach-ins and solidarity events and just discussion, space for discussion and dialogue and ways that you can get involved. So please come out and support them.
Yes.
Today they were there, and then they'll be there tomorrow and Sunday from 12 to 7 p.m. So stop by when you can. You can also bring food if you feel like helping them out.
Students are usually hungry. Bring
Yeah.
food.
And they have their finals coming up.
Hi. Thank you for sharing your stories and your righteous rage and your vulnerability and your strength. I'm really fascinated by clothing and textiles and garments, and I was hoping that you could speak to some of the things that you're wearing and the symbolism that represents, if you can share that. And yeah, they're just really beautiful, and I'd like to know a little bit more about how that is part of your culture.
Okay.
Should I go?
Go first.
You can go ahead.
So what I'm wearing, should I stand up? I'll stand up.
Stand up, stand up.
And fashion show.
Twirl.
Fashion show.
What I'm wearing is a traditional Palestinian thobe dress, which is cross-stitched with absolute beautiful craftsmanship in different patterns. Before 1948, when the Palestinian villages were thriving, the cities were thriving, where we were not undergoing a slow genocide and now a fast-paced one, each village, even cities, had their own patterns of cross-stitch, so that Palestinian women would recognize one another that way. Now, me being from Hawara, we didn't have much very, very intricate cross-stitching, or it was a lot more humble. It's always been a very, very agricultural little village. So it was a much less intricate stitching, or many dresses don't even have any. They just have a really beautiful belt that they wear across their waist. And then many times, now this is underdressed. I mean, you should see the ladies from Ramallah, mashallah. So we would be decked with gold everywhere. We would even have like hats with gold coins on them that are thousands of dollars, with some form of scarf that would be draped across. Again, in other Palestinian villages, Palestinian women would wear it a little bit differently. They would have a different hat that would extend high up or extend more towards the back, draped over with a scarf again. So for us, one of the ways that we beautify ourselves, that we beautify our dress, is by that cross-stitching and by these amazing Palestinian women who would sometimes kind of compete in their craftsmanship and cross-stitching. So we have some more, so Ramallah is more of a affluent city than Hawara, being a little farmer's village. So then we know that some of the tatriz, it's called tatriz, cross-stitching from Ramallah would be next level. There were a lot of beautiful cross-stitching patterns that have now have vanished, just as the villages have vanished during the Nakba of 1948. Over 450 villages were decimated. And when you decimate a village, you decimate their accent, or the way they have they speak the Arabic. You decimate their kitchen, and you decimate their culture along with their dress. So unfortunately now, across Palestine, we have adapted everyone's pattern. But you go back to the elder Palestinian women, they would be able to specifically know which pattern belongs to which village.
And yeah, there are actually several projects for preservation of the culture. So there's several books out there, and actually, so yeah, the patterns specifically, you'll see like mine has these are trees. There's a specific pattern from each region based on what was surrounding the area. So there are snowbud pine trees, and there's different types of trees. There's palm trees, there's feathers, there's different types of birds, different types of flowers, depending on the region. And actually, my grandma is coming to visit over the next 2 weeks, and I plan to hold a Tatriz workshop. So please sign up to our mailing lists, and you'll hear about this. So yeah, we'll teach some of the different patterns. It's simple cross stitch, but there's different patterns and colors, and each region also has different colors. Gaza actually has very colorful dresses. In Ramallah, my region is known, this is not from Ramallah, my region is known for a beige base and red only stitching, while other areas like Bethlehem has some velvet in there with different colors. They have longer arms. Gaza also has bright blues and very beautiful, vibrant colors. There are online databases now that some Palestinians have created that you can see the different stitches. So if you just search Tatriz, I know also, I believe, is the University of Chicago, or was it the museum? The University of Chicago has published a collection online that you can see. So if you just Google Tatriz, Tatreez, or Tob, Palestinian Tob, Thobe, you'll see a lot of the patterns. I also wanted to talk about some of the symbolism of the kufiya. Do people want to know about that? And maybe if Dani then could talk about your yarmulke.
Sure.
But yeah, for the kufiya, you will see, so this is a Palestinian scarf called a kufiya or a hatta, and it has some specific symbols on it. So these lines are known as, are for the trade routes, symbolize the trade routes in Palestine. These squiggles over here are connected olive tree leaves. And then this netting looks like fishing netting for the fishermen of the Mediterranean. And so these are the symbols that you will see in this scarf. You want to talk about your? Okay.
Yeah, let me stand up because it's on the back of my head. So yeah, I have a watermelon yarmulke, and a yarmulke is basically a Jewish head covering that traditionally men wear, but there's been kind of a dismantling of that, and so I wear it. And it has a watermelon on it because the watermelon is a symbol for Palestine, because the colors are the same as the Palestinian flag. And correct me if I'm wrong on the history, but the reason it's a symbol is because displaying the flag was not allowed, and so Palestinians would display watermelons instead of the flag. Is that correct?
Yes. In the 80s, there was a famous artist, a Palestinian artist, that drew watermelon, and that was one of the big symbols too.
But yeah, the yarmulke is supposed to symbolize like humility to God, and I also wear it as, connecting myself to my Jewish culture, and the watermelon on it connects me to my solidarity with Palestine.
Hi there. I have a question. So I follow Jewish Voice for Peace on social media, and I read carefully what they say. But as someone who's not Jewish, am I supposed to do more? What's my role if I like what Jewish Voice for Peace is doing?
Yeah, I mean, Jewish Voice for Peace is and always has been led by Jews, and the vast majority of leadership and staff and everybody are Jewish, but there is a large number of non-Jewish allies that support the work through either through donations or through volunteering, showing up to actions, signing petitions, that kind of thing. I think JVP does a pretty good job as a national organization of making sure it's clear in its messaging when we're sending a petition as Jews, for example, that means something. And when we're sending a petition that's more broadly about grassroots support for a particular thing, that we would invite allies and non-Jews to be a part of that. But I remember getting this question a lot. I used to be the membership person at JVP, and people would ask me all the time, can I join if I'm not Jewish? And I would always say that JVP, it's like a lot of our Jewish families, and it's you know, like my husband is Catholic and my mom converted, and it's like our Jewish families. As long as you're willing to be a part of organization and a movement that is approaching this from a Jewish perspective and from and understanding the importance of like the Jewish angle in the Palestinian-led movement, then absolutely JVP wants you on board.
Thank you all so much. It seems like one of the confusions that keeps coming up in the mainstream media is the idea that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And I know that's not true, and probably most people here know it, but could you just kind of specify why that's all wrong?
So Judaism is older than the State of Israel, and Jewish people have been subjected to oppression through pogroms, through the Shoah, through a lot of different ways. But Israel is a country that was built off of occupation and was built off of apartheid. And so criticizing that and criticizing a state that kills and displaces the indigenous people of the land cannot be anti-Semitic, because Jewish people are not Israel. Israel claims to represent Jewish people, but there's Jewish people around the world, and there are a lot of anti-Zionist Jews. And even if there weren't, there is no world in which criticizing an apartheid and criticizing a country and a military that is perpetuating genocide is bigoted. Like, it is just human decency to support human rights.
I would add to that, too, that there's a really long, rich history of Jewish opposition to statehood, let alone statehood in Palestine. Theodor Herzl is widely regarded as sort of the father of Zionism, the person who created the idea of a modern nation state in the land of Palestine. And even Herzl he threw out other locations as options: East Africa, South America, and even before the foundation of the state, there were lots of Jews all around Europe and the United States who didn't like the idea of having a state or having a state in Palestine. They either thought we shouldn't have one or it should be somewhere else. And so ultimately what won out, the ideas that won out, were never inevitable, right? It was a confluence of political things, the Holocaust, a whole bunch of other interests at play that wound up creating a Jewish country in that particular location on top of Palestinians. And it's a state, it's a modern nation state by design. That's how it was conceived, that's what it is. It's not a religion. And it has not replaced Judaism. As much as some people want it to, it has not. And so it just is not the same. If you critique Israel, you are not critiquing Jews at all.
And one thing that people need to realize is Semites are not just Jews. Semites are Arabs. So the biggest anti-Semites are the Israeli Zionists, who are committing genocide against the Gazans right now, against the Palestinians. So they're the biggest ones.
I think it's ironic that Iowa City is the U.S. city, UNESCO City of Literature. You know, and the UN is so intrinsically involved with the history of Israel and what's going on today. I don't even know how to phrase my question, but should not this unique fact of Iowa City as a UNESCO City of Literature, should that not be used with more leverage to raise consciousness and action? That's my question.
I would say that everything could be used with leverage. Like, basically, this issue is in everything. So this Israel's bombing of Gaza is a climate issue. Israel's bombing of Gaza is a disabilities issue. It's a healthcare issue. It is an education issue. So I think basically anybody in this room, whatever your interests or your careers are, whatever sector of the world you have, whatever field you're in, you can be an advocate through that work. So I'm a member of Scientists for Palestine, and we have been giving, as a professor, I've been giving lectures in Palestine every summer and organizing lectures with international professors. And our colleagues, I don't know if my colleagues in Gaza are alive. And I don't know, the destruction of the universities there is completely destroyed. So for my interests, I'm working on an EduSide archive to archive the schools and the destruction to schools and academics. So we have people who have had events here of poetry for Palestine. Whatever job you're in, whatever work you do, whatever interests you could be used. So thank you for that question. I would hope that we could use that as well as anything else. I don't know if anyone has a specific answer to the UNESCO.
Yeah, like there is a group here called Writers for Palestine. They're the ones who put on the poetry event. And so, yeah, like adding on to that, like anything that you know and you can do is helpful. Like the poetry helps tell stories. It also helps spread the word of what's happening in Palestine. It also reaches people who may not want to come to a political event their first time. So I think writing is really powerful itself too, because there's so many writers on the ground now in Gaza who are releasing their work, telling their story. So preservation of writing is also really huge.
And Israel has been targeting those writers and poets, and you've heard about the story of Arar, that he was conveying the suffering of the Palestinians through his poems, and Israel warned him, and then they came after him and they killed him with his family. So where is the outrage from the City of Literature? Why nobody is talking about this?
And you have to consider that this movement is slowly getting bigger and bigger to call for the liberation of Palestine. So it is way too slow, in my opinion, way too slow. The outrage is so delayed. And I am honestly shocked that this event, we have been planning this event for quite a while, for a couple of months. And I was like, it's surely by May, it must be done. And surely they must stop the bombing. We're still here. So whatever you can do, whatever your background, first become more aware, become more educated, talk to people who support Palestine. And honestly, it is our young American students who have had that veil lifted from their eyes because they did not follow the mainstream American media again. It was actually social media that finally allowed people to know what we've endured for decades.
And just to add to your point really quickly, that change, much too slow, I completely agree, is also true specifically in the Jewish American community. Poll after poll is showing that younger Jews are less and less committed to the support of Israel. And there's a lot of reasons that I could talk about all night for that, but it's changing. And it's too slow, but it is changing.
My question, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my question maybe is especially for the Jewish panelists, but I'm just wondering, so for a Jewish person who is born and raised in Israel, what do you think is the kind of morally or ethically correct thing for them to do?
To oppose their government.
So yeah, I mean, I think it would be similar to what I would say a morally or correct course of action would be for us born and raised in the United States on native land and with governments committing war crimes. I think the stakes are a little bit more, they're closer, you know, things are happening, it's a small area, so you see it more clearly, and I think, I think opposing the government, getting out in the streets, you know, demanding equal rights and dignity and freedom for Palestinians, whatever that needs to look like, I think they have an obligation, just like we do, to speak up.
Yeah, adding on to that, there has been people who are not enlisting in the IOF, and that's a start. They do face jail time, and so it is hard for that movement to kind of pick up, but people have been doing it. And, you know, there have been protests and things in Israel. Sometimes, though, it does feel like some of those protests are not necessarily just to, like, some of them just feel like they're just targeted towards ceasefire instead of, like, liberation down the line. And I think moving towards that direction is definitely really necessary. Ceasefire needs to happen immediately, but then after that, they do have to kind of push for liberation and an end to apartheid. I don't live there, so I don't know exactly how their government is structured, but I think that, yeah, like...
That's my phone. Oh. I have an alarm, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think, like, there needs to be, like, a stronger movement after the movement for ceasefire.
We have time perhaps for maybe one or two more questions.
I want to thank all of you so much for your persuasive stories. I mean, every one of you is captivating and courageous and heartbreaking, right? And for our Jewish friends, I really appreciate your courage to speak truth to power. And I find it really hard. I think it takes incredible courage to stand up against conventional wisdom. And I think too often we're paralyzed by optics. Right? What do people think of me if I'm supporting the minority? And I guess I find myself very challenged to persuade people to care enough to do the right thing. And what would you advise me? Like, you've done this, right? You've spoken against your majority at tremendous risk. Like, just that, I loved your slideshow with the picture of the door. It was just brilliant. It just shattered my heart to see, like, that you were rejected by your own mother, you know, to speak truth to your, you know, to power. What can we say, or what can we do? Like, what do you recommend would be persuasive to enroll people to do the right thing and to abandon optics, because it really matters that we stand in alignment with Palestine or the right, you know, the right side?
I think, like, the biggest intro to Americans is that by the U.S. supporting Israel, there haven't been as many, like, good social programs here in the U.S. Like, we don't have free healthcare, but there's free healthcare there and things like that. And I think drawing people in with something that affects them is a good first step. And then after that, I have to hold out hope that people have empathy, and I have to hold out hope that people care about other human life, even if it's not their own. But it's hard. I haven't really been able to convince any of my family, but people are all different. And so I do hold hope that, you know, like everyone was saying, the tides are changing and they are too slow, but this is a righteous cause, and liberation's always a righteous cause. And so centering the people who are affected and their stories is crucial, and hopefully that changes the hearts and minds of the world, and hopefully it means that, you know, we'll see a free Palestine in the coming years.
I want to thank you all for coming to our conversation today, and would encourage you all to see this as one of many conversations that need to happen on this topic and so many others. If you would like to stay after and share a word with one of the speakers, we certainly encourage that. These conversations are critically important, especially in these very difficult and divisive times in the country that we all live in today. And today, I think, is a demonstration, as I look out at this very diverse crowd of the kind of community that the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council and many organizations, such as those that have co-organized today, want to create. A more inclusive, a truly diverse and rich community where we can hold conversations like these and continue them and hopefully ripple them out so that more folks can understand the power and importance of what has been spoken here today. I would like to thank Yaser, Deema, Mona, Dani, and Samantha for your truly powerful and excellent program today. We would also like to thank Rabia Naala, who couldn't be here in person today, but she designed the beautiful slides that you saw that accompanied the speakers' stories. I would encourage you all to help support organizations like the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council, as well as Students for Justice for Peace in Palestine, Iowans for Palestine, JVP Eastern Iowa, HOPE. These are organizations that you can contribute to make this the kind of community that we all want to live in. So please look out for the materials that are at the table there and in front of you on your tables. We hope that you will support all of our organizations. Thank you very much, and we are adjourned.